without further ado, Dr. Priest.
So I am physically located at the National Clonal Germplasm Repository in Davis, but I'm also the research leader of the National Arid Land Plant Genetic Resources Unit in Parlier. And that unit is considered a work site of Davis, and that's why I'm the research leader for both. And I joke that my bosses don't think that I have enough to do, so they gave me a third repository on an acting basis, the National Clonal Germplasm Repository for Citrus and Dates in Riverside, California. I am very familiar with that repository from late 2014 into early 2016. For 16 months, I was the acting RL, and then since mid-July, for the last 4.5 months, I've also been the acting RL. So I've seen it in two snapshots. When we get down there and you see the picture of the staff, everyone looks younger because it's from before. So, as I said, I live in Davis, and Parlier is 200 miles to the south. And even during COVID, I've been able to go down there some to see the staff. It's about a 3.5-hour drive, and I talked to Kim. In fact, she talked me into doing this presentation a couple of weeks ago on my drive down there. So I drove down and back and spent time at the center, and that was an 11.5-hour day. If it weren't for COVID, I would have spent the night down there. Riverside is 450 miles away, and I don't feel very safe flying, so I've only been down to Riverside under this current watch once, and that was the very early part of September. And I did that as a trip. I went down and spent some time at Parlier, and then I drove from Parlier to Riverside to kind of break that up. So right now I'm managing all of the national gene banks in California. And we're going to start out talking about Davis. And we all of the gene banks have the same basic mission: to acquire new genetics, to fill our gaps, to preserve and not let go extinct the genetics that we have, to freely distribute the genetics, especially to the scientific community, and to characterize and evaluate if that's possible. And this is a picture that I took of a bee in one of our cherry accessions, if you're just wondering what those flowers were. Peter Bredding has split that apart, and I'm going to be talking today about maintenance and regeneration because I think that regeneration is part of maintenance. A little bit on acquisition, but you can see that these are in red on Dr. Bredding's slide because he thinks that these are the most important things that we do. At the end, one of my very last slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about a way to look at characterization, evaluation, and the research part. But this is going to focus on gene bank management and maintenance and regeneration for the clonal crops. But to make you familiar with what we have in Davis, we have 14 collections. So our grape collection is the second largest collection of grapes in the world, and by far the most genetically diverse. Our taxa are from 55 different countries. Geneva also has a grape collection that's smaller than ours. in the almond and stone fruit, there are really 5 collections. So we have almonds, peaches, apricots, cherries, and plums are all in those particular collections. We have the nut crops of walnut and pistachio. We have olive, fig, pomegranate, persimmon, mulberry, and kiwi fruit. So our collections are considered to be Mediterranean fruit crops, and that's where they're primarily from, although they wild forms are all over the world. We have 2 basic physical facilities here in Davis. And since you can't be here, we will do a slide tour. And this is a shot of our nursery. So here in Davis, we have about a 2-acre container nursery that I'll show you an overview of in just a second. And about 15 miles to the west in Winters, California, at beautiful Wolfskill Experimental Orchard, we have about 70 acres, and that's where our field permanent collection is. And the nursery supports the operations in the field. So this is basically our nursery, but I should redraw this line because we've taken over this corner here. Someone moved out and gave us this trailer, so we're using it for storage, and we've cleaned out some of this area. The university was putting junk there, and we were too, to be honest. So we have 7 insect-proof screen houses that serve various functions. This screen house here is full of grapes that we received as cuttings from the Foundation Plant Services of UC Davis that were pathogen indexed. We do not have a pathologist on staff, but we have well over 200 accessions now that, at least when we received them, had been pathogen indexed and were free from those pathogens. And then we've kept them in the insect-proof screen houses. These are mainly Vitis vinifera. It's where their collection overlapped ours. And it's interesting, even though it's only about 200 accessions, it's often 20% of our distributions. And we don't tell people that they're getting material from cleaner stock because we can't prove it. We don't have the pathologist on staff, but we know that that's a big upgrade. So these 2 screen houses are important for that. There's an extra room in each of these screen houses here and here that have pathogen indexed prunus that came to us from APHIS. So those were clones that came in, and they went through their whole meristemming and thermotherapy and everything that they do. And the other screen houses we're kind of using as nursery area, and in some, over here, we have some accessions backed up, but it's folly to try to back up our accessions in pots because it's hard to keep them alive. They do much better in the ground. We have a lath shade house. We have 4 small glass-covered greenhouses, and 2 of these are set up with 4 propagation intermittent mist benches on them. This is really a hoop house. There was a tear in the plastic when they took this picture, but this is now a shade house. We don't have any utilities in there, and it works really well as a shade house. We call this a head house, even though it does not abut any greenhouses, but it serves all the functions of a head house, and we have storage there, and then we also have walk-in coolers, so when we harvest dormant cuttings for distribution, we can keep them in coolers down at this end of the building. Because Davis has historically been on ground water that was out of the ground. And that water was high in boron and magnesium and other minerals. We water everything in the whole nursery with deionized water. And so we have big tanks that hold that water. Now we get a mixture of river water and groundwater, and it's better, but we're still watering everything with the pure water. Then we have offices and labs up here. We have a molecular lab where Molly does his work on identification of our crops and other research. And we have a tissue culture lab in there as well. And in our trailer, we have a meeting room and as well as office space. And then these other buildings off to the right, those are all university buildings. So that's our nursery. And that supports, as I said, a beautiful Wolfskill experimental orchard. These trees, these olive trees, are about 170 years old, and they're some of the largest ones that I've seen. I think it just goes to speak for the soil and the environment there. And then back here through the olives, this was in the autumn because of the yellow color, is part of the grape species collection. And so I was over in here about when I took that picture. And so our grapes are in different blocks. We have the National Kiwi Fruit Collection is up in this area, and the Corvallis Repository is serving as a partial backup for cold hardy kiwi fruit as we have been moving them down here to Davis to have them in one location. On this side is mainly a collection of hybrid grapes. There's some really interesting breeder lines that have some good cold hardiness that interest breeders from the north central states. And then this area here is all of our wild species of grapes. Our vinifera grapes, the typical wine and table grapes, are down in, there's actually 2 blocks here down in this area. And then as we go further south, these are our pistachios, and we have walnuts in 2 locations. We've repropagated the fig collection, and I'm not going to have much on that. The figs were falling over because they had been planted in about 1983, and they had been grown in containers, and nobody ever pruned the roots. So we have a really bad circling root problem in our figs. We're having trees that are a foot or more in trunk diameter, and only 6 inches of that is being connected to the root system because of the girdling that's occurring from the circling roots. It's a mess. But they're on their own roots, so we don't lose germplasm because they sucker like mad. We repropagated the peach collection. Carolyn Debuse joined us, and that was her first project. And our old peaches were just falling apart, and so we separated the wild peaches from the cultivated peaches because the wild peaches are more vigorous and needed more space. We've got some really interesting wild relatives of English walnut from Western China in this collection here that are irreplaceable because China's closed its borders. So the repropagated peaches cultivars are down here. And then these apricots, as I'll show you, no longer exist. There's maybe a half a dozen trees that we're still working on getting propagated, but we had them bulldozed out this spring. There's the new peach cultivar block. And we propagated from here. These stumps got bulldozed, and I'll show you that. We've had a real problem that showed up in the almond collection. Malaria or oak root fungus has come in there, and that's caused us to really put a lot of labor into this area here. And I will expand on that as I go through this presentation. We have a canal that has irrigation and drinking water in it that splits the property. We have a triangle up here that's new prunus accessions. We've got almonds from the Republic of Georgia. We've got North American plums. We also have Georgian walnuts in there. We've got material from Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan. So we're excited about these new seedlings. They're planted on 1 meter centers because we don't have enough land. So that means that you crowd things together more. The cherries are still as they are. They could use repropagation. We have more prunus and walnut seedlings over here, more wild relatives that have come in from various collection trips, including Armenian plum Prunus cercifera seedlings that Joseph Postman and Ed Stover collected in 2006. The olives were repropagated before I came, but the apricots now fill this area, all repropagated. The plums haven't changed, except they need repropagation. We are unexpectedly, for reasons that I'll explain in a couple of minutes, repropagating the persimmons and flipping them with the old almond block. And that's because the persimmons have some resistance to malaria, and we need the land. And then the pomegranates are here, mulberries, the new figs, the old olives that are mainly just stumps, and the old figs that are still there. We'll get those out of there once we have everything propagated, and we're sure we have these well established. Araucaria is a walnut wild relative, Chinese wingnut, and it has really good disease-resistant genes. It's just not very cross-compatible with walnuts. This is a few years ago, but one of the most recent picture that I could find of our staff. And so we had a couple of Chinese scholars working with us, and this is an extended staff because Giovanni was our location safety officer. For those of you who know Howard, he retired a couple of years ago, and Jeff Morsfelder is now our field manager. He took that over from Howard and left the nursery. So shortly after we hired Carolyn Debuse, one of the first things she noticed was some mushrooms like this growing out of the stump of one of our almonds right in the middle of it. And then we watched, so she got on top of it, propagating and grafting the almonds, but we got a circle of death. So you can see the dead trees, and there are more and more dead trees every year to the west. This was to the east. This is to the north, dead trees here, and dead wild relative to the south. And with all of that sunshine coming in, and the weeds grew really well in there because we were losing this collection, and you all know that's not what you want to see in any of your collections. And so what we are doing is we're flipping the almond and persimmon collections. So we have 2 rows here on their final spacings of repropagated almonds. And if you look up here where my pointer is, those are also repropagated almonds, and then we stopped because there are persimmons that we're repropagating. To get them out of there, to put the almonds in. And so without an extra field, it really becomes a juggling act. So the almond collection on this other picture was over here to the left, and this is our row of persimmons that we put them in when we put them in, and this is the peach collection. And we have another row of peaches in there now, and their roots are growing toward that armillaria, which is a root-borne disease. One healthy root needs to come in contact with an infected root to pick up the pathogen, and then it'll travel up. So this spring, we hired in a bulldozer after marking the trees that were giving us a tough time as far as propagation goes, and we bulldozed everything out of the almonds. And so our circle of death has stopped. And this is our pile of brush from that, and we still don't have this cleaned up. It creates quite a mess. And this is our peach collection here, and this is that row of persimmons. And I attended a talk where a grower dug a trench and put in a double layer of 6 mil plastic and stopped his healthy roots from growing over into the infested area. So we had a trench dug 400 feet long, approximately 5 feet deep. And then you can see the ladder for getting in and out of the tree. Then we went in and dug it to make sure it's 5 feet deep all the way down. You can see Dwight down here, and this is some of the soil that he has put out. And here's Dwight throwing out some of the soil, and Carolyn up at the other end cleaning this out. Now, this is work that we would rather be putting into other things for the repository, but this is an emergency situation. The armillaria, the dead trees were about 6 or 7 rows from the peaches, and according to what I've read, you don't want to let it get any closer. And so here we are, socially distanced, so you can see that everybody's about 25 feet apart or so, and Dwight, I'll show you his solution so he didn't ever have to do this again to hold up the plastic. He came up with these grommets and tying the plastic up to the trees. And Sal was pushing the soil in, and it ended up good thing that we were socially distanced, because Sal, who's off the picture here, this is the day he came down with COVID. And Jeff and Jessica were both waited the appropriate incubation time another week and were tested, and they were negative. And they were the only two that had been, they thought had been close enough to Sal. So this is as far as it was the last time I was out there, which was before Thanksgiving. So you can see this is a double layer of reinforced plastic. The color doesn't make any difference. We just want to stop these peach roots from growing across here. So this is just a pile of soil, and we'll get that all leveled off, and hopefully that'll work. Here's our row of persimmons, and then once we can get this land over here prepared. We had help from a nursery on repropagating some of these almonds. So that was our challenge that we've had with the almonds. The apricots, these are new wild relatives of apricots here. That we're kind of interested to see what the fruit is going to be like. But the collection was falling apart because of Eutypa trunk rot. That's a fungal trunk rotting organism that the spores are plentiful in the air in the winter in California when it rains and it's wet. And historically, the apricots were pruned in the winter, And I had a pathologist go through and asked her if she could find just one tree in there that did not have Eutypa, and she could not find even one tree that didn't. So the collection was falling apart, and Carolyn had finished, she's our prunus horticulturist, had finished basically propagating the peaches, so she moved on to the apricots, and the repropagated apricots collection looks great. The old collection, we didn't even know what the fruit were like on some of the accessions because they were so old and crowded and diseased. This year was a real delight. We learned a lot more about the fruit in that collection and the variation in it. So that's nice. The problem with apricots is that they want to be great big forest trees, and we don't want them to. And so this is what the old apricot collection looked like this spring after we bulldozed it. And these with the white paint are Carolyn's problem children that she's still working on. But you can see she's done a great job on propagation because almost everything's pushed out. I didn't put this slide in to show it, but this is the peach collection over on the left, and with the spring flower color, you can see the diversity. We have 2 copies of each accession as you go down the row. The old peaches all were sunburned, and when we had the bulldozer in, we pushed out these stumps so we can get this land ready for planting. Everything in 2020 has been a challenge, as we all know, and the Davis Repository was not immune from it. The grape collection needs to be pruned. We have about 14 acres of grapes. It needs to be pruned annually. And this year, our contractor let us know a couple of weeks before they were going to come and prune that another contractor had stolen away all of his workers for a higher wage. And by that time, it's too late to get another contractor through the system and get the thing pruned. And COVID was hitting. So we've had a lot of fruit tastings over the years, and we put out a request, and they didn't all come at the same time. It might have been anywhere from 2 to 3 to a dozen, but we had over 50 different people that came and helped us prune the grapes. And this is a pretty good example. This person here is working on one row, and then the next row is skipped, and she's working on the third row over. So that puts them at least 22 feet apart, and we felt that that was safe. We got about 85% of the collection pruned, and then one of our regular staff came down with pneumonia in her right lung, and since pneumonia is a symptom of COVID, we shut down the whole volunteer program, and Bernie and I went out and pruned for a little longer, but we didn't get everything pruned this year, just most of it. So that was a real challenge and a weird thing. We've never had a contractor lose their laborers before. My bosses said I could hold them accountable, but what could they do? They didn't have anybody to come prune our grapes, so that was what we had to do. I was slow coming around to this, but hedging is the best way to maintain these collections and keep the branches low enough to try to minimize ladder use for a collection of whatever they're going to be collecting from the trees, whether it's cyanwood cuttings, fruit, leaves, or pollen. And so from a contractor, we have they send 2 different pruning machines. They're nasty looking. This one has 7 saw blades, and there's my hand against just one of the saw blades. And that's for the big stuff. And then this other pruner over here has 3 smaller saw blades. The whole thing rotates, and it prunes the smaller trees. And we had a lot of the collection pruned this year, and we've been doing this repeatedly, although some of it is new pruning. So this is how they go through, and they can take out a lot of wood out of these trees. So this is in our pistachios, and they had not been maybe hedged ever. So we took them down here, and I show this picture because this tree was not hedged, so it shows a before and after, and it was not hedged because Patrick J. Brown, the relatively new nut crop breeder from UC Davis, had made crosses in this one. This is Pistachia integrima, and he was looking for disease-resistant rootstock. Integrima can be a source of verticillium resistance. Some of the pruning and some of our new wild relatives, these are Georgian wild walnuts in the nursery. Here's a Cathiensis over here with this like panicle of nuts hanging down. I was in Japan, and I'm not in Japan, in China, and the Chinese are trying to breed this character into Juglans ricea, the one we eat, to increase the yield. But you can see it brings the trees down, it keeps them in shape, and this is the older trees, so they really get smashed up. And you can see you can take off some pretty good sized limbs with this. It's a very cost-effective way to maintain the collections compared to if we had to have people go and do this by hand. And this is what the olive collection looked like after the hedger went through. And I saw this, and I saw Carolyn was probably the first person I saw after that, and I said, "Doesn't it look great?" And she says, "Yeah, if you want your trees to look like boxes." And they do look like boxes, but I think they look great. One of the other units here in Davis, where Dan Klupfel is the research leader, because they realize the value of the collection and they utilize it, just purchased a $36,000 hedger that we're having permanently mounted to a tractor. This one has blades that go back and forth across each other, kind of like a shrub hedger that you might use in your backyard, except it's a lot bigger and it can reach out, and we think it can save us quite a bit of money. Hedging, not only, we just had these peaches top this year, but there's fruit on the ground, and it also goes and thins the fruit since we don't have the labor to do that. So that also helps with collection maintenance. And with Jeff Morsfelder in charge, and starting with the grapes, if they were small enough, we've been mowing up a lot of the prunings and creating a mulch, which is good for the soil, and then not burning as much, which creates a pollution problem. The Almond Board of California has given us a grant, and we've just processed the paperwork to buy a new mulcher shredder so we can do this on even bigger stuff going forward. So that was a really nice gift from the industry. Here's another collection maintenance challenge that cropped up. The new almonds that we planted over by the persimmons, when they leafed out this spring, showed classic zinc deficiency. It's kind of a rosetting at the buds, and we never noticed it before, but the pomegranates are right next door, and they were showing the same type of zinc deficiency. It's just we needed the almonds to hit us square between the eyes and for it to be our new babies. So we've been applying foliar applications of zinc to try to overcome this problem. Some of the trees grew out of it, some of them not so much. Another a really good thing that happened to the Davis repository is that we replaced Jeff, who moved out to the field, with Alex Sanchez as our new nursery manager. Prior to coming to us, he worked at the repository in Miami, Florida, so he comes in with excellent germplasm experience, and we're really happy to have him on staff. He's making a big difference for us. Now we're going to drive down or fly, however you want to get there, 200 miles to the south to the National Arid Land Plant Genetic Resources Unit. I can tell you, Kim, the ride goes by so much faster when I talk to you on the phone for an hour or so. Claire Heinitz is the curator there. We hired her in March of 2016. I like this picture of Claire. This is from before we hired her, when she was working on her PhD, and she's somewhere in the Southwest collecting Vitis arizonica, a wild grape relative that grows in the desert and the arid areas there, so it has good potential for drought tolerance. And then just this year, Jerry Serimian, our longtime field manager, retired, and we hired Michael Spinola, and so he's in the process of learning the ropes. And judging from what's behind him with these hoppers, it looks like he was planting wheat accessions for Aberdeen, Idaho. I believe that's Claire over there. And this is Jerry before he retired. So the mission of the National Arid Land Plant Genetic Resources Unit is different than up at Davis, because we primarily use our resources to grow accessions for other repositories. And we have a partial backup of the Corylus collection from Corvallis. The rest is the same, like I talked about before. This is our office, and behind it is the lab. And the lab facilities are actually pretty nice here. This is a seed germination area and our seed storage walk-in cooler. We have seed and clonal, and we also regenerate seeds for other repositories. So we have various types of seed cleaning equipment. We have a head house with a couple of greenhouses attached, use one mainly as a shade house. And so that's what that looks like inside. And here we're starting seedlings to support the field operation. Service regenerations are about 60% or so of our budget, and these are peppers that we regenerated for Griffin, Georgia. And of our collections, it's about 40% of the budget goes to their maintenance. And we serve a bunch of repositories. So the hazelnuts for Corvallis, and we have beans and garlic and lettuce from Pullman. We have wheat and small grains from Aberdeen, and Aberdeen gives us as many as 2,000, as few as 600 accessions. From Ames, Iowa, we have sunflowers, and then from Griffin, we have vegetables that would tend to rot in the hot, humid, wet climate in Georgia, and same with Geneva. We have some vegetables that require long growing seasons. That's where the sunflowers really come in as well. And then our collection are xerophytic industrial crops, including Opuntia. Jojoba or Simonsia is an oil seed crop. It's actually a liquid wax. We have buffalo gourd, another oil seed crop. Here's the cactus. The Wayuli or Parthenium is receiving a fair amount of attention along with the cactus. We have Limnathus or meadow foam and Physaria that used to be Lascarella. And you can see that it's a fairly small collection of these accessions that we have down there. But we only have 3 permanent staff and then some temporary workers as well. So it's a fairly small staff, and as I said, most of it is on regenerations. So when you're regenerating, you've got to do a little bit of everything. So you're a beekeeper, you're a thresher, bagging flowers at some cases to control pollinations, bagging lettuce heads to prevent the seeds from escaping, planting. These are, I believe, pepper cuttings that we had to grow them for about 2 or 3 years to get them to fruit and get seeds to get back to Georgia. I think that was Capsicum tomentosa, kind of a fuzzy one. 2 weeks ago, this is what the partial hazelnut collection looked like down there when I took the picture. So the trees do well there. And top accomplishments, and so I can leave time for questions. I'm speeding up a little bit, as you might have ascertained. Claire went on a Waiuli or Parthenium collection trip in Texas and collected 20 new accessions. So that should add nicely to the genetic diversity and filling some of the gaps in the collection. Claire also did this propagation when we received some new accessions, but here's a study that they put out to look at growth of our accessions for a biomass of production and harvest. And you can see they use real delicate equipment when they propagate these machetes. And some of the crops that we've done during lockdown, garlic, wheat, I believe those are peppers in both cases, no, sunflowers and peppers. This is just a little bit of a philosophical thing that I think a lot of people miss. This is a little bit of diversity in our mulberry collection, by the way, that we in the National Plant Germplasm System, we provide diversity to support scientific research, but it's a two-way street. The scientific community, if everything's working properly, provides evaluation and characterization data back to the gene banks for posting on GRIN Global. So even though I haven't talked about evaluation and characterization, we do some of that, but the scientific community is doing way more than we could possibly do. And I will end there. Normally the first Saturday in November, we have a pomegranate and persimmon tasting going from sweet to sour. So I'm guessing on the left would be more sweet and sour and more sour as you work your way down the table. So thank you, and I think I've left time for questions.
Oh, John, that was excellent. I think our staff is getting the idea, at least I hope they are, that we really are one big family. We have quite similar missions with different germplasm, and a lot of the challenges that we're facing, and it seems like in an ever accelerating setting, you're facing down there with your facilities and your collections and that kind of thing. So it's just really great to see the presentation you gave us. And I'm sure it's prompted a few questions from our group.
Hi, Dr. Priest. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, what are the breeding projects that you guys have at your station or throughout the different stations that you work with, particularly in reference to the Opuntia and other dryland species?
We don't have any breeding efforts at the station down there with directly with any of the plants in the collection. Instead, we're maintaining them and trying to maintain a supply of viable seed if that's the way that particular crop is propagated. And the Parthenium, which is Wayuli, is propagated that way. Fortunately, a lot of their seeds are apomictic, so they can be clonal, except in diploids, they're going to be more outcrossing. But we're not doing any breeding effort there. In Davis, the breeding efforts have primarily focused on rootstock development utilizing wild relatives, because with rootstocks, in many cases, we directly use wild relatives, and there's less of the things that you want to breed out of there compared to scion breeding. And wild relatives often can contain alleles for disease resistance or tolerance, and that's important. So that's where we've been focusing.
Noah, thank you.
Hi, John. One of the questions that I have is, with your limited personnel and also probably limited material, how do you guys down there select who gets distributed to in regards to that of course, the scientific and the federal and commercial industries and that, you know, they're top-notch and everything. But when you get the individuals that are doing research, and some of it is really important research that they're doing, they're kind of adding on to where little pockets are being missed and providing information. But how do you select on who gets what?
It's not all that difficult. As you say, the scientific community are pretty easy to identify. It's the private individuals that you have to look at a little bit more closely. The reason, if they can give a good reason on why those specific genetics are critical to their research, then we give it to them. If they're just looking for something to plant in their backyard, then we do not. And we have one person, Jenny Smith, who screens them, and we have a form letter that I wrote and had vetted through technology transfer, and that we send out. And in that letter, it says, if we made an error, please let us know. And sometimes we get talked into it, and other times we do not. In that letter, we have a link to the University of Minnesota has a plant information online, a plant finder site, and you can find nurseries that will ship cultivars, and that way a person gets a whole plant, not just a bundle of sticks. And we've had people complain, I ordered these plants and all I got was sticks. So we reject a lot of orders. But when we were deciding to do this, one thing that my staff made me really well aware of is that giving out to everybody brought a lot of love our way, and the staff did not want to lose the love. And the love's not too strong a word for this. And so we had to figure out how could we do this in a fair way and not lose the love. And so we decided that we would give out one large order to the California rare fruit growers, and then let them do the distribution, because it's the distributions that eat our lunch. All the sorting of orders and all of that, we just don't have the staff for that. So we allow them to get 25 items, and we'll give them 50 cuttings each. Each cutting is about 18 inches long, and they divide them into 3. So now they've got 150 cuttings that they use in their scion exchanges. After the first year, when they asked for Hayward kiwi fruit, which is a real common cultivar that you can get in nurseries, I talked to them and said, if you do that again, we're not going to give it to you. You guys have more of a lot of our germplasm copies than we do, and we'll only give you things that are not common. And that's working out really well. So once a year or once every other year, I get a call by somebody who's irate because they didn't, we couldn't send them their material. And I've never had one of those conversations end without that person profusely thanking me for all of the good stuff that we do. And I take them to that University of Minnesota site, and it works out well. So you can tell from the use and how they explain that they need those specific genetics on whether they really need those specific genetics or not.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that because there will be other people doing the distribution in the near future, and just trying to get a clarity on it so everybody's on the same page is extremely helpful. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Jenny goes through them all first and weeds them out, and so she sent out thousands of copies of that letter, and I've maybe had 4 or 5 calls that started out negative and ended up positive as blowback. So it's worked well.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, John, for the wonderful presentation. I've wanted to visit your facility in Davis for a long time and haven't yet. But my question to you is, do you treat your pathogen index grapes or prunus any differently from any of your other accessions so they do not, so that they stay pathogen free besides keeping them in the screen houses?
Well, the ones that came in pathogen indexed, we have isolated in screen houses that have grapes in the other section. It's just a small section. Those are in pots. What we do is we want to get copies in the ground as quickly as possible. So we would propagate from those and get them in the ground outside, and then they'll get exposed to the elements and possibly infected. But we still have that original copy inside of our screen house. So it's just a way with the facilities we have to try to do due diligence. When I started, this repository had a bad reputation for sending out diseased plants, and I haven't heard anything about that in the last 5 years. And I think this helps, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Okay, so you do distribute from your field collection. You don't just...
Yep.
Okay.
We distribute from the field collection primarily. It's just those grape cultivars that we're distributing from the screen house. And it's only about 200 to 220 or 30 or so.
How often do you have to propagate them to rejuvenate them?
The grapes are pretty bulletproof. They do well in pots, and we have them in fairly large pots. So they were propagated going on, they're getting close to 10 years old, and they're still among our most vigorous grapes. And we think that's because they're virus-free. And we don't see any reason to repropagate them. So that's not on our horizon.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Well, John, I have, if you could just respond to this. You've been there about 10 or 15 years now, and you've seen what it was like when you came and what's happening now. What's the greatest challenge that you have, either from climate or other aspects of gene bank management, that you didn't have to manage 15 years ago, but now it's a big problem?
there were more resources available. It was 11 years ago, but you're in the ballpark. When I was hired, and inflationary pressures have reduced the discretionary portion of the budget, and it's the discretionary portion that you hire student workers and contractual and term and temporary workers, and a lot of those people are really important to running, especially a nursery, because you need weekend waterers and those kind of people. That's getting tougher and tougher, which means that I've had to get more and more creative and with gifts. And then not only did we get that one piece of equipment from the almond board, they're also buying us an orchard vineyard sprayer, which is another $20,000. And for this year, next year, and going into the following year, about $40,000 a year for labor. So there's at least one commodity group that's kind of filling that void, but that's not my preference of a way to run a gene bank. I would like to have, and I've totally struck out on land, and we basically used up our land. So things are, we're painting ourselves into a corner.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that was it. Of course, there's a lot of ways that a gene bank can be devastated, but underfunding is not a uncommon situation there. But I do want to end on a good note, and it's reminded me, I see Molly is on the call, and I know, we have a genetics lab. Nahala, it has not, I think, interacted too much with you folks at Davis. Our field people, I'm hoping that they now see some names of people. Maybe they'll get in. Well, Claire did come up and visit us. That was great. That time she briefly could visit. But I'm hoping that our technical staff can get together and discuss and innovate on some of the collective challenges that we face now that we know there's corresponding folks on in the other gene banks. So great to have a group participation like this. Thank you so much for giving us such an excellent presentation. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you for organizing this and inviting me, Kim.